Stop using useEffect for everything. React 19 replaces many common useEffect patterns completely. In the next few minutes, I will show how this works and other major React 19 features that you should know. Let's start with the biggest change. React 19 introduces a new API called use, and it completely changes how we handle async data in components. So, what is use? It allows React to wait for data before showing the component. No manual loading state, no extra wiring, just cleaner components. But to see why this is powerful, let's look at how we used to handle this before. Before React 19, for fetching data, we used to use useEffect. First, we used to create a state for data, then another state for loading, and sometimes one more for error too. But that wasn't all. We also had to decide when the effect should run. We had to think about dependency array. We had to make sure we didn't trigger extra renders. And we had to manually control the entire flow. Start loading, fetch data, handle success, handle failure, stop loading. The component wasn't just showing data, it was coordinating a process. And the process added extra logic to almost every data fetching component. Let me show you what that actually looked like in code. First, we will create 3 states for loading, error, and for data that is post. Here we are fetching data from API and setting state accordingly for error and data. So this works, right? But we are manually controlling the full life cycle for loading, success, and error. What if we didn't have to? That's exactly where use comes in. Let's see code for the same example with use. Here we create the promise once, then inside the component we read that promise using use. No loading state, no error state, no use effect. React handles the waiting automatically in much cleaner and simpler way. You might be wondering, what about loading and error? With use, React takes care of that too. If the promise is still pending, React suspends the component, and if it fails, an error boundary handles it. So no need to manage it manually. Use can be used for context too. Let's see first how we used to use it before React 19 and then with use. Earlier, as you can see here, we used to create a context and wrap our component with a provider. And inside the component, we used useContext to read the value. It works well, but again, another hook, another import, another API to remember. Now let's see how we can use it in React 19. We don't need useContext anymore. As you can see, instead of useContext, we just call use and we pass the context directly. So just one use can be used for promise and context both. So React 19 simplifies how we read data. But what about sending data? Like submitting a form or updating something on the server. Before React 19, it involved multiple steps. Let's say you want to submit a form. Earlier the flow looked something like this. The frontend sends a request to an API route, which then talks to server. And then we manually handle loading, success, and error again. That's where server action comes in. So what is a server action? A server action is just a function that runs directly on the server. By adding simple directive, we'll tell React that this logic should stay on the server. And React creates a secure way for the client to call it. This is a server action. Use server indicates that this function should run on server. It receives the form data when the user submits the form. And here we simply extract the username and save it to the database. As you can see in code above, now instead of making a fetch call, we connect this function directly to a form. When the form is submitted, React sends the data to the server function automatically. So what problem does this solve? We don't need to write separate API endpoints, we don't need to manually send post requests, and we don't need to handle form submission logic on the client. Server logic can now be triggered directly from the components. But even now we still need to track what's happening during submission, like when the form is loading or if something goes wrong. Earlier we handled that manually. React 19 introduces useActionState to simplify this. This is how we used to write all manually for loading, handling errors. This is how we will code with useAction. This hook gives us the action function, the pending state and the error state automatically. Now the form connects directly to the action and React tracks loading and errors for us. As you can see here, if it's pending, disable the button. So benefits of useActionState are no manual state management needed, less code required, and better user experience. But sometimes the submit button is inside a separate component, and that component doesn't know if the form is submitting. So we will still need a way to track form status across components. That's where useFormStatus comes in. Earlier we passed loading state as props, like shown above, just to disable the submit button, which meant more prop dealing and more coordination between components. We manually pass the loading state to the button, only to know if the form is being submitted. But useFormStatus will change the way we code. As we can see in code here, this hook gives us the form's pending state directly inside the specific component, without prop drilling. Now, any child component can react to form status automatically. But even with all this, users still have to wait for the server response, and that can make the app feel slow. React 19 introduces useOptimistic to solve this. Normally, when a user performs an action, we wait for the server to respond. Only then we update the UI. This delay can make interactions feel unresponsive. For example, adding a comment, then user clicks submit and waits for it to appear. But with useOptimistic, we can update the UI instantly, even before the server responds. Below is the code for it. We immediately add the new comment to the UI and React syncs it with the server later. This makes the app feel much faster. So does this mean there is no waiting time? With useOptimistic, we don't wait for server response to update the UI, and React syncs with the server in the background. The server still takes time, but the UI doesn't wait anymore, like showing a sent message instantly in chat app. All of these features of React 19 makes app faster. React 19 also simplifies how we pass refs to child components. Earlier, this required a special wrapper. To pass a ref to a child component, we had to use forward ref, just to forward the reference inside, like shown in code below. In React 19, this becomes simpler. We can pass refs like normal props, like shown in code below. So, no wrapper is needed. But one important thing, it's not just the name ref. Let's see the code next. Below is the code in parent component. React only treats it as a real ref when it is passed from the parent using the ref attribute. That's how React knows it's a reference and not just another prop. So, in React 19, refs can be used with less boilerplate. React 19 also improves how we can manage metadata, like page title or description. Earlier, we handled this outside our components using separate logic. For example, updating the page title, we had to do this using side effects. As shown in above code, we manually updated the metadata after render, just like any other side effect. But in React 19, we can define metadata directly inside the component. Let's see the code next for the same. You might be wondering in above code, this is just an HTML meta tag. How does React know to treat it as metadata? Because React 19 now allows us to define metadata directly inside components and automatically places it inside head section. Let's see summary of React 19. React 19 simplifies how we read async data using use. Server actions make it easier to send data without API routes. useActionState helps track form submission state. useFormStatus allows nested components to react to form status. useOptimistic improves user performance by updating UI instantly. Refs can now be passed like normal props, and metadata can now be defined directly inside components. So, less boilerplate, cleaner code, better user experience. If this helped you understand React 19, consider subscribing for more such tutorials. Like and share it with your friends, and let me know which features you would like to explore next.